Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire. The 7 remaining Democratic presidential candidates are gathered here for their final debate before next Tuesday's New Hampshire primary. Let's meet the candidates. Former Governor Howard Dean of Vermont. Retired General Wesley Clark of Arkansas. The Reverend Al Sharpton of New York. Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts. Senator John Edwards of North Carolina. Senator Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut. And Congressman Dennis Kucinich of Ohio. Welcome to you all. The candidates' positions on this stage, by the way, were determined by a random drawing. The candidates during this debate will have 1 minute each for each answer. Any rebuttal or follow-up will be 30 seconds. The candidates will have lights that will help them keep track of their time, and if an answer should go over, the candidates, and indeed all of us, will hear this sound. We do ask the audience to hold applause during the course of the questions and answers. Now let's introduce my colleagues. Tom Griffith, the principal news anchor of WMUR TV Channel 9 here in Manchester. John Distaso, political reporter of the Union Leader here in Manchester. And from ABC News, anchor and senior editor of World News Tonight, Peter Jennings, who has the first questions. Peter?
Thank you, Britt. I hope we don't confuse you, gentlemen. Britt's going to moderate the first hour. I'm going to moderate the second. And by luck of the draw, I get the first flight of questions to Senator Lieberman, to Governor Dean, and to John Kerry. Governor Dean, I'll come to you in just a second, but I'm going to start, if I may, with Senator Kerry. Senator, Democrats everywhere tell us that they want to nominate a man who will not be beaten by President Bush using the Republican weapon of taxes. You know that President Bush will be relentless on this subject. You know that it is the Republicans' argument of choice. It works for Republicans. In your career, you voted to raise billions of dollars in taxes. You've advocated spending billions more in this particular campaign. So I would like you, at the outset, to put yourself in a moment on a stage like this, if you're the nominee sometime during the fall. And if you are the nominee, what will you say exactly, precisely, if at that time President Bush says, Senator Kerry is going to raise your taxes and I am not?
That's a fight I look forward to. Because if George W. Bush wants to stand there beside me and defend raising taxes for people who earn more than $200,000 a year, which are the only people who might be argued will have a tax increase by rolling back the Bush tax cut that they rushed through, instead of giving all of America health care and education so we truly leave no child behind, that's a fight we deserve to have in this country. That's a fight we will win. I am going to protect the middle class. And in the course of my career, Peter, I have voted for countless numbers of tax cuts. When I arrived in the United States Senate, the highest marginal rate was 72%. We took it down to 28% under Ronald Reagan. It then went back up somewhat. I voted for cutting the capital gains tax. I voted for tax incentives for businesses. But this president has created an economy that feeds the special interests and the powerful and the corporate power, and he has not helped the average worker in America to advance their cause. I will.
Thank you, sir. Governor Dean, I'm going to ask you the same question. It happened, of course, to Governor Dukakis, to Walter Mondale, and to Al Gore. And you are supporting more tax increases than Senator Kerry. But I do also, in fairness, want to give you a choice here. If you'd like to use some of the time to talk about, or maybe all the time, your choice, to talk about what some people think was your overly enthusiastic speech to your supporters the other night, which many people actually think has hurt your candidacy badly.
Well, Peter, you may notice that my voice is a little hoarse. It's not because I was whooping and hollering at my third place finish in Iowa. It's because I have a cold. We did have a little fun in Iowa. I thought I owed it to the 3,500 kids that came out and worked for us, and sure, I would have liked to have been done a little better, but I congratulate John Kerry and John Edwards on great campaigns. I think they ran a great campaign. Let me just take a second to talk about this tax stuff. I'm going to take a different position than everybody. I think we ought to get rid of the whole Bush tax cut, and here's why. There was no middle class tax cut. 60% of us got $304. Has your property tax gone up more than $304 because the president cut cops on the beat, refused to fund special education, refused to fund No Child Left Behind? How about your college tuition? Is that going up more than $304 because the president cut 84,000 kids off Pell Grants in order to pay for the tax cuts for people like Ken Lay? Your health care, is that going up because the president cut 500,000 kids off health care? There was no middle-class tax cut in this country. Somebody has to stand up and say, we cannot have everything. We can't have tax cuts, pay for health care, pay for No Child Left Behind, and pay for an adequate defense. I believe we ought to have balanced budgets. I've done it 12 times. That is the real issue in this campaign. The future health of this country depends on a balanced budget, and we've got to start telling the truth and stop making promises.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Lieberman, you've warned for years that this image of being the party of tax increases has hurt the party badly and helps Democrats lose elections. But you voted for increasing taxes yourself, and while you've argued for cutting some in this particular campaign, you've also advocated increasing others. Audition on taxes, if you wish. But I'll also give you a choice, as I did Governor Dean. Perhaps you'd also like to comment on the gentleman from Massachusetts. Would Senator Kerry's answer on taxes be effective if he is challenged by President Bush in debate this fall?
Here's the way I'd like to start this, Peter. I saw a wonderful article recently that said that in a private conversation, President Bush said to someone that the Democrat he thought would give him the toughest fight for re-election was Joe Lieberman. Incidentally, this is an opinion on which I agree with President Bush. I think the reason is that the Republicans can't run their normal playbook on me that they try to run on Democratic candidates. They can't say I flip-flop because I don't. They can't say I'm weak on defense because I'm not. They can't say I'm weak on values because I'm not. They can't say I'm a big taxer or a big spender. In this campaign, I'm the only candidate up here on the stage that has come out for genuine tax reform, not only to protect the middle-class tax cuts that middle-class families did get in the last 3 years that many of us fought for, but to apply, to carry out, to pass a tax cut for 98% of the income taxpayers and to pay for it by raising taxes on the 2%. That may make some of the higher income people unhappy, but it's the right thing to do for the middle class and for our economy.
Tom, you're next.
I have two candidates, Congressman Kucinich and General Clark. I'd like to start with you, General Clark, if I could. Everybody in the campaign is talking about credentials, what they've done as an indicator of what they'll do, and you make a case of the value of your military experience. But your Democratic Party credentials in this race do matter to many within the party. The nominee, as Peter mentioned, will come under harsh criticism from the Bush administration on everything from where they stood yesterday about the war, today about the war, tomorrow about the war, yesterday about taxes, today about taxes, and tomorrow about taxes. So can you be an effective leader with regards to the platform of this party?
Well, Tom, I voted for Bill Clinton and Al Gore. When I got out of the military, I looked at both parties. I'm pro-choice, pro-affirmative action, pro-environment, pro-labor. I was either going to be the loneliest Republican in America or I was going to be a happy Democrat. And there are people who are worried about Democratic Party credentials. I've got to tell them that. But I'm a Democrat of conviction. My wife and I spent our entire time in the uniform taking care of people. And that's what the Democratic Party does. And that's what I want to do as president. And I'm in this party now, and I'll bring a lot of other people into this party too. And that's what we need to do to win in November.
So do you look, as a quick follow-up, do you look then that your lack of experience within the party itself is an asset?
Well, I've got a lot of experience in leadership. I've never run for elective office before, and in the military, most of us were never members of a political party. But I think what matters in this party is the clarity of your ideas, the strength of your convictions, and your ability to communicate. The Democratic Party is a party of ideas. It's a party as broad as a Montana sky. We welcome everybody into this party, and we care about people. That's why I'm a Democrat. That's why I want to be president, to help people.
Thank you. Congressman Kucinich, you are the candidate on the stage that has a time certain by which you want to withdraw troops from Iraq. You've said essentially that within 90 days you'll remove American troops, seek a UN force to replace them. What if there's no cooperation from the UN? Do you pack your bags and leave Iraq at this point?
No, actually, the plan is predicated on the United Nations being presented with an entirely different direction. And that different direction would be that the United States would disavow any interest in the oil, ask the UN to handle the oil assets of Iraq on behalf of the Iraqi people until the Iraqi people are self-governing, ask the UN to handle the contracts until the Iraqi people are self-governing. The United States should renounce any interest in privatization of the Iraq economy, and we should ask the UN to help construct a cause of governance in Iraq with a new constitution and elections. That approach, plus to fund a UN peacekeeping mission, in addition to that, to provide repairs for what we destroyed in Iraq, plus reparations for the families of innocent civilian non-combatants, all that constitutes a plan which would enable the United States to go to the UN and say, look, agree with this plan, send in UN peacekeepers, and 90 days later we'll have our troops home. I do stand here saying that I believe sincerely that we should bring in UN peacekeepers and bring our troops home, and I have the plan to do that.
Thank you.
John, you're next.
My questions are for Senator Edwards and Reverend Sharpton. Senator Edwards, after voting to authorize the president to go to war in Iraq in 2002, you voted last fall against an $87 billion expenditure to support the troops there and aid the anti-terrorism effort. These votes may appear to some to be inconsistent and a reaction even perhaps to the political winds of the moment. Why aren't they inconsistent? How are they consistent?
Because I said from the very beginning, before the first resolution was ever voted on in the Congress, that in order for this effort to be successful, it was absolutely critical that when we reached this stage, that it be international, that it not be an American operation, that it not be an American occupation. And so long as it was that, we'd see the problems we've seen right now. Everyone on this stage has been critical of the way George Bush has conducted this phase of the operation. But at the point where we had to stand up and say yes or no, we had to stand up and vote and support that vote, I thought it would be a mistake for me to say to the president, what you're doing is right, I support it, go forward, here's your blank check, come back next year and ask for more money. He needed to change course. We needed to have the United Nations in charge of the civilian authority. We needed NATO present to help provide security there, at least along the Saudi Arabian and the Iranian border, so we could concentrate on the Sunni Triangle. And actually, I have to say there are two of us on this stage, Senator Kerry and myself, both voted against it, and I know that both of us felt we needed to say loud and clear to President Bush that what he was doing was wrong, and we thought he needed to change course.
So was it a protest vote or was it a vote of substance? And had it failed, what do you believe the scene would be like in Iraq today?
It was not a protest vote. I voted exactly the way I thought I should have voted, and not only that, had I been the deciding vote, I would have voted exactly the same way. Because what would have happened had that occurred is the president would have immediately come back to the Congress with a plan, changing course, so that he could get the approval he needed.
How do you know
and I
that?
thought it was critically important for us to say to this president, what you're doing is wrong, you have to change course. It's all well and good to criticize him, that's just words. We came to the point where we had to stand up and take responsibility. I took responsibility.
Just to follow up quickly there, how do you know the president would have come back, and how do you know that whatever he asked for would have passed had you voted
Because
no
I
when your
know,
vote was
Brit,
decisive?
because I know that the president nor us would have ever left the troops over there without the support that they needed. None of us would have allowed that to happen. But it was critical that we say to if we had said yes to this, if I can just finish this, if we had said yes to this, it would have been tantamount to saying, here's your blank check, go forward, come back next year, we'll give you another blank check, you can continue this policy, and all of us will stand on stages and criticize you. But when it comes time where we have to put our rear end on the line and take responsibility, we won't take that responsibility. I took responsibility. I think it was the right thing to do.
Reverend Sharpton, your Iraq policy calls for immediate withdrawal of U.S. troops. And as a human rights advocate, is there anywhere in the world today where you would send troops or use military force to combat government-sponsored killing, genocide, or oppression? In effect, what is the Sharpton doctrine of foreign policy?
The Sharpton doctrine of foreign policy would be to support emerging democratic nations and those nations that are underdeveloped with real trade and aid. There are billions of people around the world that need clean water systems, clean sanitation systems. We don't need to only talk about a military presence. We need to talk about a humanitarian presence, a development presence. And I think that that would aid our country in developing the intelligence that would protect Americans. What I've said is that we need to come out of Iraq and submit to the United Nations and go forward in trying to project to the world that we're their friends rather than their cop. And I think that that would be the policies, as I've traveled all over the world, from the Caribbean to Africa to Europe to the Middle East. People need our trade and aid. They know we're a superpower. The question is, can we be a super help in a time of need? If we prove to be, we would have those people as our allies as we go after bin Laden rather than try to go to Mars before we settle the problem on Earth.
That concludes round one. Tom, you start round two.
Senator Kerry, in a speech at Drake University, you said in your first 100 days, you would move to increase our armed forces by as much as 40,000 troops. You said there was a dire need for 2 full divisions. I'm the parent of 2 teenage sons. We're patriots, and people are wondering right now about voluntary versus draft. And as president, how do you hope to lure and attract quality people into the military? And as a follow-up, where do you stand on the issue of the draft?
We don't need a draft now, and I wouldn't be in favor of it under the current circumstances. But look, the first place you start to attract people into the military is to have a president who can prove to America that that president will be responsible about how that president deploys the military. All across this country, there are families right now, all of us have talked to them, who are suffering greatly because the Guards and Reserves have been called up. They're overextended. The troops of the United States of America are overextended. Their deployments are too long. The families are hurting at home because they lose money from the private sector when they called up and they get paid less in the military and nobody makes it up to them. The fact is that if we're going to maintain this level of commitment on a global basis, and for the moment we have to, because of what's happened, we need an additional 2 divisions. One's a combat division and one is a support division. Now that's the responsible thing to do. I've also said responsibly, that's temporary, because I intend to be a president who goes back to the United Nations, rejoins the community of nations, brings other boots on the ground to help us in the world, and reduces the overall need for deployment of American forces in the globe. And I mean North Korea, Germany, and the rest of the world, where we can begin to set up a new architecture of participation of other countries.
Thank you. Senator Lieberman, I hope you'll allow me to take liberty with my overly stuffed email box.
Go right ahead.
Okay.
You have that right under the Constitution.
This one came to me and has repeated to come to me from rockthevote.com. We hear about health care coverage issues involving older voters, particularly prescription drugs, but young people also have serious challenges getting adequate health coverage. How would your plan improve health insurance coverage for this new generation?
Yeah, very important question. Let me say that there is a scandalous fact, really a morally scandalous fact, which is that 43 million Americans don't have health insurance. 2 million more than when George Bush became president. I must say, as I go around New Hampshire, I've learned a lot. People tell me that their number one concern, middle-class families who have health insurance, how they're going to pay for it. And this goes for young, middle-aged, and older. I'm proposing to create a national health insurance pool from which, like the one that members of Congress get our insurance from, and we would say this: if you don't have insurance now, you'll be able to get it probably free. If you're among the low-income working poor. If you're a child, you will be covered by insurance at birth. If you are fired from your work or lose your job, you will not lose your health insurance. Medikids is part of my program. Every child born in America will become a member of Medikids, and it will cover them from birth through 25. Why 25? Because young adults have a hard time affording health insurance, and a lot of them think they're not going to get sick. But they do, and we need to cover them.
Congressman Kucinich, let me Let me get very local with you for a minute, if I can. We here in New Hampshire, of course, some of our school districts are having trouble meeting the testing standards of No Child Left Behind, which apparently you did vote for. You were in favor of, I believe. Is that correct? Our education commissioner recently said that we can't really settle on what is a very narrow and strict determination of a student's progress. What would you do at this point with No Child Left Behind? Would you throw it out? And if you would, what would you replace it with?
The answer to your question is yes, I would. And what I would replace it with is a new educational structure where the focus would be on helping to bring forth the creativity of our children in stressing arts and language, music, to invite the participation of educational philosophers and psychologists and administrators and teachers and parents and children to take a new focus on our education, to stop this incessant direction of trying to make a nation of test takers, of putting the pressure on teachers to teach to the test, and then school districts depending on the results of those tests for their funding. No Child Left Behind has not worked out the way that anyone thought it would, and what has happened is it's become an unfunded mandate. It has become a misdirection of the way education ought to be in America. I would have a universal pre-kindergarten program where children can go to school beginning at age 3, a fully funded Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and free college tuition for all America's young people.
Thank you.
John, you're next.
Okay. Governor Dean, last December you were quoted as saying that you would not have hesitated to attack Iraq this year, quote, had the United Nations given us permission and asked us to be part of a multilateral force. Given President Bush's reference to no permission slips the other night in the State of the Union, do you now regret using that word?
I would not have used the word permission, nor is that what I meant. You know, my words are not always precise, but my meaning is very, very clear. Iraq was not an imminent threat to the United States. I disagreed with Senator Lieberman, Senator Edwards, and Senator Kerry. We had successfully contained Iraq for 12 years with no-fly zones. They had virtually no air force to speak of. It turned out they did not have the weapons of mass destruction that people thought they did, myself included. It turned out that much of what the president told us was not so. I believe that Saddam Hussein's removal from power is good, but I also believe that the way to have done it was to do it through the United Nations, which is why I opposed the president's war in Iraq from the beginning, which just brings me to one other point. You know, I'm not a perfect person. I think a lot of people have had a lot of fun at my expense and over the Iowa hooting and hollering, and that's justified. But the one thing I can tell you is that I'm not kidding about what I say. The things that I do are things I believe in. I think it's important that the President of the United States be willing to stand up for what's right and not stand up for what's popular. I did it with No Child Left Behind. That was a mistake a year ago, not just now that everybody's suffering with it. I did it in Iraq, and I did it when I stood up for civil unions for gay and lesbian people in my home state when it wasn't popular, and I'm willing to do it again as president.
Thank you. General Clark. General Clark, earlier this month you said that if elected, there will be no more 9/11s in the United States. And then you scaled back, saying no one can guarantee anything in life. Some might say that leaves a little bit of an air of inconsistency in your positions. What exactly, at this point, are you guaranteeing along those lines?
What I'm saying is I believe President Bush must be held accountable. Before 9/11, he did not do everything he could have done to keep this country safe. After 9/11, he took us to a war we didn't have to fight, and Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda is still going strong. We were at terrorist condition orange. As President of the United States, my top priority will be to keep America safe. We're going to go after the terrorist networks. We're going to go after Osama bin Laden. We are not going to live in fear in this country, and we'll use all the resources of the United States: international law, diplomacy, allies, economics, and military force if necessary to keep this country safe.
General, a top priority, I'm sure that's everyone's top priority. That's a far cry, some might say, from a guarantee. So
I never used the word guarantee. I never said that, John.
What did you say?
What I said was that the president had been saying that the attack at 9/11 could not have been prevented, and that further attacks were inevitable. I consider the statement that the attack at 9/11 could not have been prevented as an excuse to cover the fact that this administration didn't do everything they could have done. And I consider their statement that further attacks on the United States are inevitable as an excuse to cover for the fact that they are today not doing everything they could do to keep America safe. And that's wrong. That's why I'm running, and that's what I'll fix.
Peter, you're next.
I'd like to continue in this vein a little, if I may. Senator Edwards, many people, I think, believe that the greatest security threat to the United States in the 21st century is the possible confrontation between the West and Islam. Now, I know and take for granted, having heard you before, that you respect Islam, but could you take a minute to tell us what you know about the practice of Islam that would reassure Muslims throughout the world who will be listening to you that President Edwards understands their religion and how you might use that knowledge to avoid a confrontation which, as Tom alluded earlier, might indeed end up sending sons and daughters from New Hampshire to war?
Well, I have been in these parts of the world. I have been in Pakistan, met with President Musharraf, been in Afghanistan, met with then interim head of the government, Karzai. I have met with other Islamic leaders around the world, discussed with them the problems that their country and their people face. I would never claim to be an expert on Islam. I am not. But I do believe that Islam, as in a lot of other faiths, that we as a nation embrace and lift up, that I have shown respect for faiths that are different than mine my entire life. I think I do understand the tragedy of the day-to-day lives of people who live in Arab countries, who live lives of hopelessness and despair. I think that contributes to the animosity that they feel toward the United States. And part of our ongoing vision, my ongoing vision for America, includes getting at the root causes of that animosity toward the United States, which means being able to communicate not just with the leadership, for example, in Saudi Arabia, but being able to communicate directly with the people.
Do you think, Senator, do you think that we suffer and will suffer at the policy level because we do not know enough about the practice of Islam?
I think we have a responsibility when we deal with the leadership of these countries. Our relationships, Peter, have been at the leadership level, and we see the results of that. We have ongoing relationship with the Saudi royals, with President Musharraf, with Chairman Karzai. We have relationships with the leaders of these Islamic countries. The problem is we have no relationship with the people, and not only do we have no relationship with the people, it's absolutely clear that they feel great animosity toward the United States. We need to first be able to communicate directly with the people. Second, find opportunities. For example, President Musharraf said to me when I met with him, they desperately needed a public school system as an alternative to the religious schools, where their kids are taught to hate Americans. We need to take advantage of the opportunities available to us and our allies to reach out not just to the leaders of these countries for our own purposes, but also to develop relationships with the people themselves so that they understand what Americans care about and that we actually care about the peace and prosperity of the entire world.
Reverend Sharpton, I'd like to ask you a question about domestic policy, if you don't mind. If during your term as president, if you become the nominee, and you have the opportunity to nominate someone to be chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, what kind of person would you consider for the job? You name someone in particular if you have someone in mind, and maybe just take a minute or so to give us a little bit about your views on monetary policy.
Well, first of all, let me say this. I wanted to say to Governor Dean, don't be hard on yourself about hooting and hollering. If I had spent the money you did and got 18%, I'd still be in Iowa hooting and hollering. So don't worry about it, Howard. I think that.
Thanks, Reverend.
I think, first of all, we must have a person at the Monetary Fund that is concerned about growth of all, not setting standards that would, in my judgment, protect some and not elevate those that cannot, in my view, expand and come to the levels of development and the levels of where we need to be. I think part of my problem with how we're operating at this point is that the IMF and the policies that are emanating there do not lead to the expansion that is necessary for our country and our global village to rise to levels that underdeveloped countries and those businesses in this country can have the development policies necessary.
Forgive me, Reverend Sharpton, but the question was actually about the Federal Reserve Board. And
I thought you said IMF, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, sir. And what you'd be looking for in a chairman of the Federal Reserve Board?
The Federal Reserve Board, I would be looking for someone that would set standards in this country in terms of our banking, our and how government regulates the Federal Reserve as we see it under Greenspan, that we would not be protecting the big businesses, we would not be protecting banking interests in a way that would not, in my judgment, lead toward mass employment, mass development, and mass production. I think that would I replace Greenspan? Probably. Do I have a name? No.
Thank you, sir.
Reverend Sharpton, thanks very much. We got to take a brief break here, but we will be back with more questions for the 7 Democratic candidates. Stay tuned.
There's a whole new world in communications, where wireless, cable, and satellite companies are free to bring you all of today's newest services, while local telecommunications companies face outdated rules that limit your choices. It's time the rules catch up with our lives, so you can get the combination of innovative products and services you want from the company you choose. Your local telecom companies want to bring you the future, faster.
Isn't it ironic that when the confidence of most drivers is at its lowest, the confidence of the Jaguar X-Type driver is at its highest? Presenting the 2004 X-Type, the only car in its class with permanent all-wheel drive, standard.
Lease an X-Type for $299 at your local Jaguar retailer.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Ever since Alex was about this high, I have dreamt of this day. I just wanted to make sure that the day that we sent our little girl off to start her own family was every bit as memorable as the day she first joined ours. But I'm just their financial advisor. Now, how about a few words from her dad?
When you work with a Morgan Stanley financial advisor, you get someone unusually devoted to your dreams, one client at a time.
I'm on a strictly vegetarian diet.
A low-fat diet.
I'm on the mashed potatoes and gravy diet. Load 'em up.
From classic favorites to new chef-inspired creations, Boston Market has it all. Boston Market, we're always cooking.
Gym membership for June, July, and August, $68 paid automatically. Finally convincing your boyfriend to go with you? Priceless. There are some things money can't buy. For easy automatic monthly payments, there's MasterCard.
Welcome back to Saint Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire, where the 7 Democratic candidates are debating for the last time before the New Hampshire primary. We're on our 3rd round of questions, and we begin with John Distaso. John?
Senator Kerry, if you were in the Oval Office, how would you feel and how would you view a returning war veteran who tossed his medals away?
It depends what he did, why he did it.
In protest.
If I were Richard Nixon, well, given what we now know about Richard Nixon and what he did think about it, he was deeply disturbed by the veterans movement that was a movement of conscience. And I could not be more proud of the fact that when I came back from that war, having learned what I learned, that I led thousands of veterans to Washington. We camped on the Mall underneath the Congress, underneath Richard Nixon's visibility. He tried to take us to the Supreme Court of the United States. He did. He tried to kick us off. And we stood our ground and said to him, Mr. President, you sent us 8,000 miles away to fight, die, and sleep in the jungles of Vietnam. We've earned the right to sleep on this Mall and talk to our senators and congressmen. And so I can pledge this to the American people. I will never conduct a war or start a war because we want to. The United States of America should only go to war because we have to. And if you live by that guidance, you'll never have veterans throwing away their medals or standing up in protest. And while we're at it, this president is breaking faith with veterans all across the country. They've cut the VA budget by $1.8 billion. There are 40,000 veterans waiting months to see a doctor for the first time. Whole categories have been eliminated from application to the VA. And I'm not going to listen to Tom DeLay or the president or anybody else lecture the Democratic Party about patriotism when the first act of patriotism is keeping faith with people who wore the uniform of our country.
Senator Lieberman, back to what Senator Edwards said earlier about the blank check and the $87 billion. You voted for it. Is this a blank check? At what point will you say no in the future?
John, it is not a blank check, and I'll say with the withdrawal from this race of our good friend, the great American Dick Gephardt, I'm the only person on this stage who has unwaveringly supported the removal of Saddam Hussein and our troops who are there carrying out that mission, which, yes, has made us a lot safer than we would be with Saddam in power instead of in prison. I want to tell you a story, John. In Nashua a few weeks ago, I met a gentleman in a hotel, came over to me. I think he worked there, big burly guy with a crew cut, and he said, Senator Lieberman, I'm going to vote for you for president, and I want you to know why. I have a son, he's a Marine, he's going to be deployed to Iraq in a month. I trust my son's life with you as Commander-in-Chief. Well, that stopped me in my tracks. I was honored by it, told me the awesome responsibility that I have as Commander-in-Chief. I am ready for that responsibility, but I think he understood that I would never send America's sons and daughters into war unless it was the last resort. And once there, as I did in this case, I would support them 100% until they came home safely and in peace.
Senator, at some point, I would presume there will be another request for another appropriation. What then?
Well, we'll examine the request to make sure that it is necessary. We'll certainly try to cut out any gifts to Halliburton again under the money. But when it comes to supporting our troops in battle, I will never say no, period. They are our best and brightest. They are our heroes. Generations have fought to protect the freedom that we all are enjoying and exercising in this campaign for the presidency. We owe them our lives and our liberties, and they deserve our unwavering support. That's the kind of Commander-in-Chief I will be.
Congressman Kucinich, at what point in your administration will there be a closure on the deficit, given what appears to be an extraordinary spending program that you have in mind?
Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that this administration has created a deficit with tax cuts to the rich, with a war that was unnecessary, that will soon be $200 billion and could run over $500 billion, with an expanded Pentagon budget. They're driving a deficit, and they're driving a trade deficit. Let me tell you one thing I intend to do. I intend to create a universal, single-payer, not-for-profit health care system. I intend and that, by the way, we're already paying for that, or we're just not getting it. I intend to create a universal pre-kindergarten program, not-for-profit, that would be run by the public schools, that would be funded by a 15% reduction in the Pentagon. I intend to create universal college education funded by putting the tax cuts that Bush has given back to college students so they could go to college tuition free. We need to take the trajectory of the deficit down slowly, but the one thing I won't do is cut domestic programs.
Do you have a target date?
The target date is going to be judged by how much of a rut the president gets us into. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we have to get out of Iraq. And we have to stop this massive Pentagon expansion. And a president at the State of the Union address just said he wants to lock in the tax cuts. He's going in the wrong way, and I dare say that what the strategy of his administration is just to wipe out government's purpose for any social and economic justice at all. And I'm going to take the country in an opposite direction than he's taking it.
Peter, you're next.
I get General Clark and Senator Edwards this time. General Clark, a lot of people say they don't know you well, so this is really a simple question about knowing a man by his friends. The other day you had a rally here, and one of the men who stood up to endorse you was the controversial filmmaker Michael Moore. You said you were delighted with him. At one point, Mr. Moore said in front of you that President Bush, he's saying he'd like to see a debate between you, the general, and President Bush, who he called a deserter. Now, that's a reckless charge, not supported by the facts, and I was curious to know why you didn't contradict him, and whether or not you think it would have been a better example of ethical behavior to have done so.
Well, I think Michael Moore has the right to say whatever he feels about this. I don't know whether this is supported by the facts or not. I've never looked at it. I've seen this charge bandied about a lot, but to me, it wasn't material. This election is going to be about the future, Peter. And what we have to do is pull this country together. And I'm delighted to have the support of a man like Michael Moore, of a great American leader like Senator George McGovern, and of people from Texas like Charlie Stenholm and former Secretary of the Navy John Dalton. We've got support from across the breadth of the Democratic Party because I believe this party is united in wanting to change the leadership in Washington. We're going to run an election campaign that's about the future. We're going to hold the president accountable for what he did in office and failed to do, and we're going to compare who's got the best vision for America.
Let me ask you supplementary then, because since this question and answer in which you and Mr. Moore was involved, you've had a chance to look at the facts. Do you still feel comfortable with the fact that someone should be standing up in your president and in your presence and calling the President of the United States a deserter?
To be honest with you, I did not look at the facts, Peter. You know, that's Michael Moore's opinion. He's entitled to say that. He's not the only person who's said that. I've not followed up on those facts, and frankly, it's not relevant to me and why I'm in this campaign.
Okay, thank you, sir. Senator Edwards, President Bush, as you know, is worried. He said it again in the State of the Union address the other night that the Defense of Marriage Act is not strong enough, as he says, to protect the institution of marriage. You were not in the Senate in 1996 when it passed overwhelmingly. Senator Kerry was one of only 14 senators who voted against it. I'd like to know from you whether or not you think he was right or wrong, and why.
I think he was right. I think he was right because what happened with the Defense of Marriage Act is it took away the power of states like Vermont to be able to do what they chose to do about civil unions, about these kinds of marriage issues. These are issues that should be left. Massachusetts, for example, has just made a decision, the Supreme Court at least has made a decision, that embraces the notion of gay marriage. I think these are decisions that the states should have the power to make. And the Defense of Marriage Act, as I understand it, you're right, I wasn't there when it was passed, but as I understand it, would have taken away that power. And I think that's wrong. That power should not be taken away from the states.
Do you believe that that other states, for example, should be obliged to honor and recognize the civil union which Governor Dean signed? Should other states be obliged to recognize what happens in another state?
I think it's a decision that should be made on a state-by-state basis. I think each state should be able to make its own decision about what they embrace. Now, if I can take just a minute, since you've asked me a lot of process questions, can I talk about what I believe for just a moment, if you don't mind? But here's what I believe. I believe it is the responsibility of the President of the United States to move this country forward on this important issue. And there is so much work to be done to treat gays and lesbians and gay and lesbian couples with the respect that they're entitled to. They deserve, in my judgment, partnership benefits. They deserve to be treated fairly when it comes to adoption and immigration. We should examine, whoever the President of the United States is, I believe it will be me, should examine with our military leadership the don't ask, don't tell policy that resulted in a number of linguists who we desperately needed being dismissed from the military.
Senator.
There are clearly steps that should be taken by the President, in some cases in conjunction with the Congress.
I just want to follow up with you on the Defense of Marriage Act, which of
Yes.
course is the law of the land.
Yes.
Does not the Defense of Marriage Act specifically say that the court rulings in one state, which might, for example, recognize a gay marriage, may not be imposed on another state? In other words, doesn't the defense of marriage go to the very position which you yourself take?
No, the defense of marriage, first of all, I wasn't in the Congress. I don't claim to be an expert on this, but as I understand the Defense of Marriage Act, it would take away the power of some states to choose whether they would recognize or not recognize gay marriages. That's my understanding of it.
John, you're next.
Okay.
I'm Tom, I'm sorry.
No, I'm
Tom,
not.
forgive me, you're next.
It's an opportune time to, I've got Governor Dean and Reverend Sharpton. And Governor Dean, I'm going to let you step in on this discussion here if you'd like to. But my real question for you is, and maybe you can hit this first, we took a recent survey that indicated of everything out there, New Hampshire voters most cite health care as the most important factor that they're looking at when they look at the 7 of you and decide who they're going to vote for. I'll give you an opportunity to talk just a minute about what your plan is and how it's different than everyone else's. Or if you'd like to step in on this Defense of Marriage Act first, you're willing to hear that.
It's a complicated issue. We chose not to do gay marriage. We chose to do civil unions. I think that position actually is interestingly, it's very similar to Dick Cheney's, who thinks every state ought to be able to do what they want. Let me talk about health care. The advantage I have in health care, besides being a doctor, is that I've actually done what a lot of the folks are talking about. We have health insurance for everybody under 18, 99%. Everybody under 150% of poverty. All our working poor people have health insurance. A third of our seniors and disabled people have prescription benefits. We didn't wait till George Bush got his bill passed, which gave $200 billion of our money to the drug companies and the insurance companies. Now, what I want to do for this country is just expand what we did in Vermont. We can do that and balance budgets at the same time, but we can't do that and balance budgets at the same time and promise everybody a middle-class tax cut and fund special education. We can't play the game President Bush is. In the State of the Union, the president promised another $1 trillion tax cut. Where does he think he's going to get the money on top of the $500 billion deficit? We can do these things, but we can't do them without repealing every dime of the Bush tax cuts. Then we can put in health insurance. Then we can fund special education. Then we can fund No Child Left Behind.
Thank you. Reverend Sharpton. 2 weeks ago in Iowa, in the black-brown debate, you questioned Governor Dean's lack of a black cabinet member as governor of Vermont. Here in New Hampshire, we do not have a large amount of minorities either. What would you do to, beyond affirmative action, what would you do to get more minorities in leadership positions within government?
Well, let me say something about the Defense of Marriage Act. I am unilaterally opposed to any civil or human right being left to states' rights. That is a dangerous precedent. I think the federal government has the obligation to protect all citizens on a federal level. And if we start going back to states' rights, we're going back to pre-Civil War days, and I think that in its nature is wrong. In terms of my concern about minorities being placed in high positions, it must be a goal of inclusiveness. And I think the reason I question Governor Dean is he said that that's what he wanted to represent. I think that we must strive toward making sure, government must make sure it is inclusive of everyone and it reflects a nation that is inclusive of everyone, even when there are small populations, because diversity is good for everyone, and people need to know that they can work at all levels of government and the private sector and not be limited because of race, because of sex, or because of orientation. That ought to be a goal. You ought to seek it. You ought not act like it's going to just happen automatically or naturally.
Got a new round coming. Peter, you start.
Okay. Actually, I think John starts, right?
This is round 4. Peter, you're up.
By the way, I apologize. I've then come, I think, to Governor Dean and to Senator Kerry and to Senator Lieberman again. At the beginning, I asked some of you how you would defend yourselves against the Republican attack on taxes. The Democrats are the party of higher taxes. They're also going to come at you in a big way on so-called social values, not on economic values, but on social values. The President made these issues, as you all know, a big part of his State of the Union address the other night. Governor Dean, let me ask you this. Republicans already characterize you as not sharing mainstream values, and some Democrats are, I'm sure you know, worried about this. Show Democrats tonight how you would push back.
Well, let's talk first about money. The President of the United States can't balance a budget. We've not had one Republican president in 34 years balance a budget. You can't trust right-wing Republicans with your money. You ought to hire somebody who has balanced a budget. I'm much more conservative with money than George Bush is. Secondly, let's look at issues like guns. Now, that gets me in trouble among my own party, but I come from a very rural state. I probably don't have as a pro-gun control position as some other folks in the Democratic Party. I believe we ought to have the assault weapons ban renewed. I believe we ought to have background checks both for purchasing guns and also at gun shows. But after that, I think states ought to make their own laws, because what you need in New York City or what you may want in California is not the same thing that you may want in Montana. Finally, I'd challenge this president on values any day. When a president of the United States uses the word quota, which is a race-coded word designed to appeal to people's fears they're going to lose their job to a member of a minority committee, that president has played the race card, and that president deserves a one-way bus ticket back to Crawford, Texas.
Thank you, sir. Senator Kerry, you're also from New England, from the state where the president believes that activist judges are threatening the basic sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman. The Republicans will certainly remind people or make them know that you were Lieutenant Governor to Michael Dukakis. The Republican National Committee chairman, I believe, will make a speech tomorrow in which he will say that you are more liberal than Teddy Kennedy. Show Democrats how you push back.
I look forward to that fight, and I particularly want to have that debate with this president. I am a veteran. I fought in a war. I've been a prosecutor. I've sent people to jail for the rest of their life. I have, as a lieutenant governor, helped to fight to create a national plan and acid rain to protect our rivers and lakes and streams for the future. As a senator, I've stood up for years and fought for fairness. I've also voted for welfare reform. I'm a gun owner and a hunter since I was a young man. I think that my education reform and the other significant efforts to try to make the workplace fair in America are as vital to people in the South, in the Southwest, in the West, in the Midwest of this country as anywhere else. I look forward to standing up and holding George Bush accountable for pushing seniors off of Medicare into HMOs, for prohibiting Medicare from even negotiating a bulk purchase price, from turning an energy bill into a bonanza for his friends in the oil industry to the tune of $50 billion. The workplace of America, Peter, has never been as unfair for the average American as it is today. And there are more ways to describe that than I have in 60 seconds. But over the course of the next months, Americans will come to understand there's a way to make America fundamentally fair and live up to our promise to all of our citizens.
Thank you, sir. Senator Lieberman. Senator Lieberman, as you heard, the question was about social values, and you have expressed your concern in the past that your party is in fact too liberal to win the votes at the center in a general election. So I ask you for some assistance here. Do you think that these two men have given answers on social values which will or which would successfully inoculate the party against such charges?
Well, Peter, I've spent too much time the last several weeks here in New Hampshire saying that choice is up to the voters. I'm going to let the voters cast that judgment on Howard Dean and John Kerry. I will say for myself what I've said from the beginning, that for most Americans, including myself and I would guess all of us here on the stage, life is about trying to do the right thing. And often, for most Americans, our faith, our religions, the values that we get, the sense of right and wrong that we get from our faith are what helps us decide what to do in public life and in private life. So long as Democrats are hesitant to talk the language of values and show respect for people of faith, we close ourselves off from a great majority of the American people. So I'm pleased that we in this campaign have started to talk about values. Let's not let George Bush and the Republicans claim they have some kind of monopoly on values or faith-based values. They don't. When they desecrate the environment, as this administration has, that is desecrating the earth that God has created. When they give away our national treasury to people who don't need it in tax cuts because they're so wealthy, they don't have the money to help our children who are poor, our elderly with drug benefits. Those are bad values, and we ought to speak to that.
I want to try just one more time, Senator, forgive me. You've said the party is hesitant. Do you believe that Governor Dean and Senator Kerry have been hesitant or would be hesitant to take on George Bush successfully on the question of social values?
Peter, let me put it this way. This is a time to be affirmative. I'd say nice try. But this is a time. This is a time we're making our closing arguments to the people of New Hampshire. We'll have the say next Tuesday. I'm going to talk about myself. I'm going to stand up and fight for values. I said earlier, one of the reasons the Republicans don't want to run against me is because they can't say I'm soft on values. They can't say I don't respect people of faith. They can't say I don't want to support faith-based organizations when they help make this a better, more decent country.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Tom, you're next.
General Clark, Patriot Act. Come under an awful lot of criticism, as you well know. Many say it erodes our personal liberties. Well, of course, it's clear that we all want a secure country. How would your administration revisit the Patriot Act and strike a balance between national security and personal liberties?
Well, I'm very concerned about the Patriot Act. It was passed in haste. It's very long. It's got dozens and dozens and dozens of changes. What we would do is suspend all the portions of the Patriot Act that have to do with search and seizure, sneak and peek searches, library records, and so on. If they want to do a wiretap, they can do it the old-fashioned way, go to a judge with probable cause, and then bring the whole act back into the Congress, lay it out, ask former Attorney General John Ashcroft to come and testify on his use and abuse of the Patriot Act. Just lay it out. What provisions were used, for what good, why couldn't it have been done another way? And then we're going to put together the right kind of authorities for law enforcement to keep us safe. But Tom, we cannot win the war on terror by giving up the very freedoms we're fighting to protect.
Congressman Kucinich, I have a question from Cheryl Zentner. She's in New Hampshire. This is what she says. She says, why did you cut a deal to send voters to the Edwards camp if you didn't meet the 15% threshold in Iowa? She's angry. She says Edwards supported the war and the Patriot Act. Now, before you continue,
okay,
is your party divided over the war?
Well, of course it is. Of course it is. I mean, I took the position of organizing 126 Democrats who voted against the Iraq War resolution, and I happen to think it was the right position. Today, we're faced with over 500 casualties, a cost of over $200 billion, and it could rise. The casualties could go into the thousands, and the cost could go over $500 billion if we stay there for years, as a number of people on this stage intend to see happen. Well, let me tell you something. There is a difference of opinion in our party, and I stand strong and proud in saying that it's time that we get the UN peacekeepers in and bring our troops home. And I've offered a plan to do that, I mentioned earlier. Now, with respect to what happened in Iowa, let me state this, that if I was looking for someone to pair up with under the Iowa caucus system based on who I agreed with, I wouldn't have had anyone to agree with because the fact of the matter is I've had a really great difference of opinion, having been the only one on this stage who voted against the war and the Patriot Act. But John Edwards and I are friends, and one thing we agreed on in Iowa is that we both wanted more delegates. That's what we agreed on.
All right. I have no follow-up for your honesty. Thank you.
John, you're next.
Yes, Senator Edwards, checking the internet, the pro-gun ownership groups such as the North Carolina Rifle and the Pistol Association don't have glowing words about you. That might be a popular position here in a Democratic primary, but you also want to carry the South if you were to get into a general election. So could you specify for us, please, exactly what additional federal gun control measures you will propose as president?
What I believe is that, and by the way, I would point out to you at the outset of this question, remember I didn't get to the Senate by accident. I actually defeated an incumbent Republican senator who was part of the Jesse Helms political machine in North Carolina, the result of which is I'm now the senior senator from North Carolina instead of Jesse Helms, which is a very good thing for this country. And that didn't happen by accident. I grew up in the rural South. I know deep inside what people care about. For the time I was growing up, everyone around me hunted, everyone had guns. I respect and believe in people's Second Amendment rights. That does not, however, mean that somebody needs an AK-47 to hunt. It does not mean that somebody who's been convicted of a violent crime should be able to walk out of prison, walk across the street, and buy a gun. It does not mean that we shouldn't take every step that we can take to keep guns safe and keep guns out of the hands of kids. So, my belief is, first, I defend people's Second Amendment rights, but I don't think it's without limit. I think there are limits on those rights, and particularly when the concerns and rights and interests of the American people are at stake.
Well, I'd ask you to keep going and tell us what federal gun control measures you would propose in addition to what.
You mean in addition to what we have?
Yeah.
I think we should extend the Brady Bill. I think the Brady Bill is around now, it's set to expire. I think it should be extended. I think that we need to close forever the gun show loophole so that we don't have problems that I just described of people who've been convicted of violent crimes walking out of prison, being able to walk across the street and buy a gun. I think it does make sense to have trigger locks for the purpose of keeping guns safe so that we don't have 6-year-old children accidentally killing other 6-year-old children. So I think there are reasonable things we can do, but I start from the place that we have to protect people's Second Amendment rights. I have lived with this my entire life, and as I said earlier, I believe I understand what people are concerned about.
Reverend Sharpton, we haven't seen too much of you here in New Hampshire. The state only has about 9,000 African Americans in a population of 1.2 million. I know you've said your constituencies go far beyond African Americans. Why then haven't you campaigned more in New Hampshire, a state where Reverend Jackson did very well in the 1980s?
Well, first of all, let me say something. I want to address a question Peter asked. I don't agree that we need to start backing away to become more Republican to beat the Republicans. I think the problem is we need to start going forward and stop letting them establish the premise of the debate. That's what's wrong with the party. Second of all, I'm very happy to hear my friend and brother Congressman Kucinich helps people that want delegates. I want delegates in South Carolina, Missouri, and Delaware, and I want you to give me the same courtesy you gave John in Iowa. In terms of campaigning here, everyone campaigns based on their strategy and ability. I've come here several times. Reverend Jackson did do well here in the 80s, but he never made double digits here. So let's not overestimate what he did. Never got, I think, over 8%. I think, though, that I wanted to come, I came, I will continue to come, even afterward, because I think it's important you campaign everywhere. I wish everyone had campaigned in Washington, D.C., where I did, because I think it's important we be inclusive of everyone, even if we feel we're not going to get the kind of vote we would want.
Reverend Sharpton, thanks very much. We've got to take another brief break here, and when we come back, Peter Jennings will assume the role of moderator. I'll join the questioners. I might note that extended portions of this program, this debate, will be seen later tonight on the ABC News program Nightline. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Sure, all these OTC and prescription allergy medicines are approved for pollen, but some are not approved for pet dander and dust. Others are not approved for smoke. Only Flonase is approved to relieve the nasal symptoms from all these triggers. For best results, use daily. Side effects are generally mild and may include headache, nosebleed, and sore throat. Ask your doctor about Flonase. For all these triggers, all it takes is Flonase.
Oh, I shouldn't have to sell a kidney to get a new PC.
No worries. Over here.
Gateway presents the We've Got PC Savings Coming Out Our USB Ports event. Find a phone now to get a free processor upgrade on a new Gateway PC still under $500, or go with a mobile M305X notebook for under $800. It features the fast Intel Celeron processor, CD burner DVD combo, and $200 back. Call 1-800-555-2081 and go mobile for less.
Every year, James Ward buys his mom the same old birthday cake. But this year, James switched to Progressive Auto Insurance. And if they can shake things up by letting you compare competitors' rates and over 20 other facts and figures, then maybe he too should swing for the fences. Nice work, James. Think easier. Think Progressive. Visit Progressive.com or call 1-800-PROGRESSIVE.
Shifting to a trot. See if I can keep up with them on foot. Then they can get up to third gear. And they keep going faster and faster until they reach a top speed of about 45 miles per hour.
Experience adventure so real, you'll forget it's on TV. Get inside the minds of animals with Chris and Martin Kratt. Join their pack, eat their food, live their lives. Be the Creature, Sundays on the National Geographic Channel. Check your local listings.
To the last debate before the New Hampshire primary. Gentlemen, the timekeeper has asked me to suggest that you listen even more attentively to the bell than you have on occasion, though I think we generally agree you've been pretty good. Tom Griffith.
Senator Kerry, I want to begin with you, something very local to the New England region, the use of MTBE in gasoline here in the Northeast, as you know. It's been very controversial because of its link to water pollution. Here in New Hampshire, our Governor, Gene Shaheen, petitioned the EPA to let us out of that requirement some years ago, and still no answer from the feds on it. If decisions aren't made soon, they're going to have to add ethanol, I guess, which is a very costly thing that could create gas price increases and generally hurt our New England economy. What do you propose in the balancing act between the environment and the economy as it pertains to MTBE?
It needs to be banned, taken out, and the companies that have put it in need to be held responsible for it. I visited with Lisa and Randy Dinuccio. They live in Salem. They live right beside a lake in Salem. Their kids no longer use the water there to make lemonade. Their kids no longer shower using that water. They're scared of it. It's polluted with MTBE, as are 1/6 of the lakes of New Hampshire. Now, Tom DeLay and his friends in Congress have been busy protecting those companies from their responsibility, trying to give them liability immunity for what they've done. This is the worst environmental administration that I have ever seen in all my time in public life. They're going backwards on clean air, backwards on clean water, backwards on forest policy, and we deserve a President of the United States who is going to stand up to those powerful interests, as I have. I led the fight to stop Gingrich from destroying the Clean Air and Clean Water Act. I led the fight to stop them drilling in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. And as president, I will balance between jobs and the economy, but I'm not going to give people a phony choice that says it's either the jobs or the economy. Cleaning up the environment is jobs, and we're going to create 500,000 of them for Americans in the first years.
Okay, thank you. Senator Lieberman.
Yes, Tom.
On the issue of, we're right now looking to go out to Canadian drug sources in order to lower our state costs. We've announced plans to import prescription drugs, to look at it closely in order to save the state money. Is this something on this topic? Would you encourage state governors to do this, or would you seek some other methodology to try to keep drug prices down?
Yeah,
should we be going to Canada?
Yeah, unfortunately we should. And I view this as a kind of Boston Tea Party of the 21st century. I never attack the drug companies for what they produce. The pharmaceuticals that they produce keep us alive and well. But the pricing is unfair, and it is particularly unfair that Canada slaps price controls on, other developed rich nations in Europe do the same, and Uncle Sam and our citizens have to pay the full cost of research, marketing, administration of the drug companies. There's only one way that this is going to begin to turn around, and it is if we begin to allow the legal importation of drugs from Canada. That's the way we can speak with our money to the drug companies to treat us more fairly. I'll say one other thing. In the so-called drug benefit bill, Medicare, which I voted against, there was actually a restrictive clause put in by the special interest to stop this from happening, and even more outrageous, a prohibition on Medicare negotiating the lowest possible prices with drug companies for prescription drugs for the elderly.
In the meantime, Senator,
give me a break.
In
How
the meantime,
can you justify
Senator,
that?
forgive me for interrupting. In the meantime, the government moved today against another Canadian drug company. Are you not encouraging, as sympathetic as one is to seniors, are you not encouraging governors and communities to break the law?
I think we have to make it legal. That's what I'm saying. I would, and I voted for this in the Senate. I would allow the safe importation of drugs, which means to have some basic standards to make sure. But when you're bringing in a prescription drug with a brand name that is effectively is the same drug as people are paying so much money for here in the United States, that's going to send a message to the drug companies.
Tom?
Treat American consumers fairly.
Okay. I'm back over to Congressman Kucinich, and I hope that you'll allow me to dig deep again into my email bag for your next question.
It's great to communicate with the mass public. That's what this election's about.
Roger Stevenson of Stratham wrote me with great concerns that there hasn't been enough discussion on the environment. What is the most important environmental issue facing the nation? And you only have 1 minute.
Thank you. As President of the United States, I would lead this country on a new energy initiative in the same way that President John F. Kennedy decided to bring the academic and spiritual resources of this country to have the United States reach the moon someday. I intend to have a very infinitely interesting journey to planet Earth. And that journey will be about sustainable and renewable energy. By the year 2010, I'll call upon Americans to assist in creating a program not only of conservation, but of moving to renewable energy away from oil, nuclear, and coal, and towards wind and solar and geothermal, green hydrogen, and biomass. We're talking about saving our planet here. We have to understand, even here in New Hampshire, how trees are affected, and the maple syrup is affected as a product here. We have to recognize that the economy of this region has been hurt by environmental policies which dirty the air and the water. I'm going to change that.
Thank you, Congressman. John Distaso, you have Governor Dean and General Clark.
Yes. Governor, I know this is a very happy debate, as Senator Lieberman said, but there are some things that have been said. Last week, for instance, you said the 3 senators' decision to support the 2002 Iraq resolution, quote, calls into question their judgment and ability to sort out complicated issues regarding the most crucial decision any president has to make, in a conference call with New Hampshire reporters. That's a harsh indictment, and I'm wondering today if you still feel that way.
I do. We were presented with a series of facts. I came to a different conclusion than the senators did on those facts. My conclusion was that there was no al-Qaeda in Iraq, as the president intimated. My conclusion was that Iraq was not about to acquire nuclear weapons, as the president intimated, and as the British intelligence reports reported the opposite of. My conclusion was that we had successfully contained Saddam Hussein. People have questioned my foreign policy experience, and the retort that I make is that with patience and judgment, I was able to sort out, in fact, the idea that the president was not being candid with the American people when he asked that the resolution be improved. I would not have supported that resolution. I said so in Keene on September 20th, 2002. So we do have a difference of opinion. We have a difference of opinion on No Child Left Behind. I would not have supported that and have said so early on. There are differences, between us. I've said, and just to get back to Joe's more cheerful appraisal, I have said that whoever wins up here, I will vigorously support, and I absolutely intend to do so. But that does not mean there are not substantive differences between the candidates here.
Don't you think disagreeing and calling into question one's judgment and ability to sort out complicated issues are a little bit different?
I think
scale?
Someone earlier made a remark about losing 500 soldiers and 2,200 wounded. Those soldiers were sent there by the vote of Senator Lieberman, Senator Kerry, and Senator Edwards. That is a fact, and I think that's a very serious matter, and it is a matter upon which we differ.
I saw Senator Lieberman.
Might I have the opportunity to rebut?
Very briefly, sir.
Yeah, well, very briefly, we made the right decision. I didn't need George Bush to convince me that Saddam Hussein was a threat to the United States of America. John McCain and I wrote the law that made it national policy to change the regime in Baghdad. This man was a homicidal maniac, killed hundreds of thousands of people, did have weapons of mass destruction in the 90s, used them against the Kurdish, Iraqis, and the Iranians, admitted to the United Nations he had enough chemical and biological to kill millions of people, supported terrorism, tried to assassinate former President Bush. I repeat, we are safer with Saddam Hussein in prison than in power.
John.
General Clark, you've already discussed your concerns about the Patriot Act and support for civil liberties and privacy rights, but as a lobbyist for Axiom Corp, you helped secure a federal contract for the system known as CAPS-2, a passenger screening program which has been criticized by the ACLU for violating people's rights to privacy. How does CAPS-2, which I know many air traveler advocacy groups are concerned about, not do that, not step over the line? Or does it now that it's about to be in place?
Well, I don't know about CAPS-2 because I have not seen the program, and I don't think many of the people who are worried about it have. Here's what I believe. I believe that we need to use all of the tools and trade craft at our disposal to help keep this country safe. And we need to do so in a way that doesn't violate people's privacy. And when I was consulting with Axiom, and I was on the board of the company, and I did take them around and introduce them to various members of the United States government, the Defense Department, and so forth, because their technology will improve our security. But I was insistent that we do so with a firm grip on the privacy issues. Had I still been on that board when all this was going through, I would have insisted that the ACLU and others be brought in to pre-approve CAPS-2. Whether that was done or not, I have no idea. But there's nothing intrinsic in the system that we're using that can't be made fully compatible with all of the privacy concerns.
Thank you, sir. Brit.
Senator Edwards, the Iowa results suggest that a great many people have taken a look at you and seen a new face, an amiable personality, a couple of adorable kids, and viewed you with considerable approval. I wonder, though, if some people don't also look at you and say, well, he's served part of one term in the U.S. Senate. He's not going to come back for another if he doesn't get the presidency, and wondered if, while you may be very promising and attractive in their ideas, it may be a little early for the White House for you?
Well, actually, Brett, I think 32% of Iowans decided it was not too early, that they wanted me to be their president. And I think the reason for that is people are hungry for change. They're hungry for change in America. They're hungry for change in Washington, D.C. And the truth is that I'm somebody who's been in Washington long enough to see what's wrong with it and how it needs to be changed. You asked a few minutes ago to Joe Lieberman, or Joe was asked a few minutes ago about the prescription drug bill and what should be done. Here's a perfect example of what goes on in Washington every day. The lobbyists and these powerful lobbies for the drug company, they're taking the democracy away from the American people. They're lobbyists who make huge campaign contributions. They're lobbying the Congress every day. There's a revolving door between the government and lobbyists. We need to do a whole group of things to restore the power in this democracy to the American people so that these insiders are not continuing to run this government. And what I would do is ban their contributions. I would shine a bright light on their activities so we in fact know what they're doing. And third, I would make them tell us everything they're doing, who they're lobbying for, who they're lobbying, the money they're spending, who they're trying to influence. Those are the things that we need to do to bring real change to this
Is there anything intrinsically
country.
wrong, sir, with being a lobbyist?
I can't hear you.
Is there anything intrinsically wrong with being a lobbyist?
No, there's something wrong with the impact that Washington lobbyists are having on our system of government.
Sorry.
Because, since you asked me, may I say one other word about that? Because if you watch what happens there every single day, they are influencing legislation. The power of the American people to have their representatives decide only in the interest of the American people has been taken away. And it happens over and over and over, which is why I have laid out a very clear set of proposals banning contributions from Washington lobbyists. I've never taken any money from Washington lobbyists, but no one should be able to take money from them.
Thank you, Senator.
And second, making sure we know what they're doing.
Thank you, Senator. Sorry, Brit.
Reverend Sharpton, there are signs now that the earth may be crumbling under the feet of the regime in Iran. There is real dissent in that country. There's protests now against the fact that a number of candidates have been told they cannot run for election there. As president, how would you deal with the situation in Iran?
I think that one of the problems that we see in Iran in terms of the movement toward open elections, toward clear repression there, is something that we must be concerned about. But I do not in any way, shape, or form support a military intervention. I would try as best I could as president to use the power of diplomacy, the power of our trade and business with Iran, and our ability to communicate with all sides. And I would support the UN to try to bring about some kind of stabilized order there and some kind of dialogue. I think that we have an obligation to try to support democracy anywhere we can in the world. But I think that we've got to do it by supporting the United Nations and not undercutting it by going around it or by going in a way that would undermine their ability to bring these matters into some order. And I think that was the reason the United Nations was put forward in the first place. I think the fact that we don't pay our dues, the fact that we ourselves go around the UN when we want, undermines the ability of the UN to be used in situations like Iran.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton. John Distaso, you start the next round.
Yes, for Senator Kerry. Senator, wealthy Americans aren't all millionaires. Some of them are small business people who have worked hard and been successful in making perhaps $200,000. And there are some that I know that are concerned that if they receive a tax hike, that they're going to have to, the effect is going to be on their business, scale back, layoffs, perhaps even close down. What are you going to do for them who are maybe employing a fair number of other people?
Well, as a senator for years, I've fought for small businesses. I've actually been chairman of the Small Business Committee. And I think one of the reasons, to go back to Peter's question, that the Republicans are going to begin advertising tomorrow to try to attack me and sort of label me is because they know my record. They know I present the strongest challenge to George W. Bush. I'm the only other candidate besides Governor Dean who's outside of the caps. If I win the nomination, I'll have the ability to raise an extraordinary amount of money and answer them back. Today, I was endorsed by Fritz Hollings in South Carolina. I have the endorsement of General Steve Cheney, the former Commandant of the Marine Corps in South Carolina, the former statewide candidate for Attorney General, the Minority Leader of the House, the Minority Leader of the Senate, Senator Max Cleland in Georgia, because I'm talking common sense to Americans. And common sense is that you need to help small business across this country. They just cut today the manufacturing extension program for New Hampshire that has helped $35 million of additional money come to small businesses in this state. The Republicans cut it today. I'm in favor of tax reductions for small business, and I have a health care plan that will reduce the burden for all Americans, business, and those who get their health care in the workplace today.
Thank you, Senator.
That's why they're frightened, and that's why I'm going to win.
Thank you.
Senator Lieberman, I'm going to ask you a parochial question, one that hasn't come up here yet. May not be the one that you would enjoy. Going back to 1996 and 99, you and former Senator Slade Gorton proposed a bill to have regional primaries, revolving regional primaries throughout the state, which could have prompted an end to the New Hampshire primary. How much of a mistake was that now that you've literally lived here? Or, given the fact, I don't want to bring up horse races here, you're standing in the polls, is that now a pretty good idea after all?
I've gotten older and wiser, John. You know, this New Hampshire primary looks pretty good to me now. It's why I chose to start here. My wife and family and I have taken an apartment in Manchester. We've spent a lot of time talking to people here. I think they've come to understand that I have a record of 30 years that they can rely on to know who I am, and what's more important, I know who I am. I've stood up to special interests. I've put the people first. I'm independent-minded, as the people of New Hampshire are. That's why I'm confident about what's going to happen next Tuesday. The Democratic National Committee did something very good with the presidential selection process. They protected the so-called window for Iowa and New Hampshire historically, but then opened up this process to 7 other states, from South Carolina to New Mexico, Arizona, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Delaware, and Missouri. Did I get them all? And that's going to let a lot of people around America have a say early about who the Democratic nominee
So, Senator,
will be.
we're geographically sensitive. Can I ask all of you to put up your hand who would also agree next time to start in Iowa?
Who would agree to start in Iowa?
To start in Iowa.
I will, as the incumbent.
I would like to follow up. I would like to follow up by asking Senator Lieberman, I can't ask everyone at once, to pledge now to use your power as president, as the nominee, or as senator to actively oppose any efforts in the future, and they're going to come, to boot New Hampshire out of its first-in-the-nation place. Anybody
John,
can take that opportunity to do that.
Let me say 2 things. One, because I'll be the incumbent president, I look forward to going to Iowa to the caucuses 4 years from now. Secondly, I will pledge to the death to protect the New Hampshire primary. So help me God.
Well,
This is the live free or
never
die
be
state,
said
is
that
it
any
not?
of you
Yes.
pander.
Thank
Mr. Hume.
I believe
General Clark, Governor Dean has said that you're a good guy, but he thinks you're a Republican. Now, we're told you did vote for several Republican presidents, President Nixon, President Reagan, said good things about the first President Bush, and even about this President Bush. You said in an article published in the Times of London back in April as the war ended, quote, "Liberation is at hand. Liberation, the powerful balm that justifies painful sacrifice, erases lingering doubt, and reinforces bold actions." As for the president, you wrote, quote, "President Bush and Tony Blair should be proud of their resolve in the face of so much doubt." Given those statements, given your votes, I think it is not unreasonable to ask you when you first noticed that you were a Democrat.
Well, actually, Brit, I did vote for Al Gore in 2000 and for Bill Clinton in 1992 and 1996. But when I was in the military, I was not a member of any party. I was an independent, and that's the way it is done in the state of Arkansas. And when I got out, I looked at both parties. And I'm a fair-minded person. And when the President of the United States does 2 things that I agree with, one of them attacking the Taliban in Iraq, and the other is not quitting in the military force, in the use of military force in the middle of a dust storm, then I'm going to say so. And when I'm president, I hope that Republicans will praise me when I do things right.
Well,
But can I just finish my statement?
Please.
I'm running for president because I don't like the direction George Bush is taking the country in. I am a Democrat, and I want to turn this country around and set it going in the right direction. I want to put a strong basis of values back into this Democratic Party and take George Bush head on, because family values is our issue in the Democratic Party. It is not the Republicans' issue.
Could not a reader be justified in concluding from this piece that you wrote for the Times of London in April that you did indeed support this war and was pleased by its outcome, and as you said the first time when asked the question, probably would have voted to support it?
No, that's not true. In fact, if you look at the whole article, what you'll see is that the article lays out a whole series of tasks that have to be done later on. And it's written in a foreign publication. I'm not going to take U.S. policy and my differences with the administration directly into a foreign publication. But I made it clear in the article, and I think you've got it there. If you'll read it on down, you'll see that I say this doesn't mean they've got to focus now on the peacekeeping, the occupation, the provision of order. There's a whole series of tasks that I laid out for them to do that, in fact, they were incapable of doing. I did not support this war. I would not have voted for the resolution. But once American soldiers are on the battlefield, then I want them to be successful, and I want them to come home safely.
Thank you, General Britt.
Senator Edwards, the Democratic National Chairman Terry McAuliffe said yesterday, I believe, that the president, by bringing up his possible support of a constitutional amendment on marriage, was prepared to introduce bigotry into the Constitution. Do you agree with that?
I'm completely opposed to the constitutional amendment. I think it's wrong and unnecessary. I wonder if I can just step back for a minute. There's been an enormous amount of discussion in the first hour and a half of this debate about us, about ourselves. You know, if we can just take a minute and talk about what's actually happening in the country. For example, there's been no discussion about 35 million Americans who live in poverty every single day. Millions of Americans who work full-time for minimum wage and live in poverty. We have, in a country of our wealth, if you'll let me finish, in a country of our wealth and prosperity, we have children going to bed hungry. We have children who don't have the clothes to keep them warm. We should, and I understand that maybe on some poll that may not be a big issue, but the truth is it's important. This is what we should talk about it and do something about it because it's wrong. And we need to, the Democratic presidential candidates, we have a responsibility, I believe a moral responsibility, to do something about 35 million Americans living in poverty. And the only thing I'm suggesting, we need to spend some time, more time in this debate, talking about the issues. Instead of talking about ourselves, why don't we talk about them? Why don't we talk about the voters and the things that affect their lives? That's what we ought to be doing.
Well, Senator, I don't think anybody would dispute that abortion remains a potent issue in our national life, and the chairman
35 million Americans living in poverty is also an important issue.
I wouldn't dispute that for a moment, but the chairman of your party has accused the President of the United States of bigotry, and I would just like to know if you agree that bigotry is in play here.
It's not the word I'd use, but I think the President is dead wrong on this issue.
Thank you, sir.
Senator, I inadvertently robbed John Distaso of a question to Congressman Kucinich. I hereby restore it.
Okay. Thank you. Congressman, I understand the principle behind your call for the United States to withdraw from NAFTA and the WTO, but under this bilateral trade situation, how do you force progressive trade conditions?
Do you have a feeling he's ready for you?
Yeah, well, I did have that feeling all along. Well, what would it be? Sanctions, withholding exports to some countries? And what about the consumers here who you've admitted will face much higher prices?
This graph is about the loss of New Hampshire jobs because of NAFTA and the WTO. 22,000 jobs can be directly traced to NAFTA and the WTO, jobs that were good-paying jobs in the state that were lost. This other graph is about the loss of 3 million American manufacturing jobs because of NAFTA and the WTO. As President of the United States, I intend to have a trade structure which supports manufacturing in this country: steel, automotive, aerospace, textiles, shipping. I intend to have a manufacturing policy which stops the hemorrhaging not only of manufacturing jobs, but high-tech jobs as well. As President of the United States, my first act in office, understanding how NAFTA and the WTO has severely hurt the state's economy, my first act in office will be to cancel NAFTA and the WTO and return to bilateral trade conditioned on workers' rights, human rights, and environmental quality principles.
Congressman, I apologize. I apologize that we didn't see the graphs a whole lot better than we did on radio.
Excuse me, Peter, on radio I was showing it to Howard Dean, and I'm glad that Howard had a chance to see it.
Are they at your website, sir?
Pardon?
Are they at your website?
This information comes from the National Association of Manufacturers.
Good.
I'm sure it's on their website.
Good. Thanks. Thank you
and
very
this
much.
information comes from a briefing paper from the Economic Policy Institute, It was given to me by a group of New Hampshire, by the people of New Hampshire who are working under the Fair Trade for New Hampshire.
Okay,
and I'm supporting their efforts, and frankly, I wish that every candidate on this stage would join me in saying that you would agree to cancel NAFTA and the WTO in light of what it's cost New Hampshire.
Tom Griffith. Anybody want to take them up on that?
Yep. Governor Howard Dean, I have a cousin in the audience who's from New Jersey and a longtime loyal Democrat. And she called me a few times and said, who do you like? What are they saying? And all along the time, I said to her, I'd give her my input, that when I mentioned anything about the 3 New Englanders that are on the stage, she would say, we don't need any more Northeasterners on the ticket. Now, with that question, lay out some of the red states and blue states, and what red states you would pick up as the nominee that the Democrats did not pick up in the year 2000.
Does anybody need a description of red and blue states anymore?
They may. Clarify, please.
Red states were Republican in the last election. Blue states were Democrat. Okay.
We've got to talk about jobs in order to do that. You know what a red state that's very vulnerable and eligible for us is? South Carolina. They've lost enormous numbers of steel jobs and textile jobs, exactly the kind of thing that Dennis was talking about, because of WTO and NAFTA. Now, I'm not going to get rid of WTO and NAFTA. We've globalized multinational rights for corporations. We have not globalized labor and environmental rights, and we need to do that if trade's ever going to work fairly. So we're going to have opportunities in places like Arizona, Montana, Colorado, Ohio, West Virginia, and even in the South. And you know why? Because they're going to do what you just did to John Edwards. You're going to keep asking him about gay marriage, and John Edwards is absolutely right. This isn't about gay marriage. This is about jobs. This isn't about race. This is about education, because everybody needs a good education, no matter what color you are. This is not about the things that divide us. If we're going to ever win another election again in some of these states, we have to talk about education, health care, and jobs. We cannot fight the Republicans on their ground. We're going to fight them on our ground.
For
Reverend Sharpton.
Right.
You speak about being against the death penalty. Do you agree? Do you disagree with the death penalty in the capital murder of a police officer?
I disagree with the use of the death penalty because it has been proven too many times to have been discriminatory in where it has been applied. It has not been proven to be a deterrent against crime. And I do not think, because it has been proven wrong, that we have the right to take lives if we can't give lives and we can't give them. Let me say this quickly, because I want to add to 2 of the answers of 2 of my colleagues here. One, I agree with John Edwards about increasing help for businesses. I've called for a 2-year deferment of small businesses so we can get more businesses on. But I think that one of the things we're not talking a lot about tonight, too, is education. I think that we cannot let the Republicans talk about values only in terms of personal morality without dealing with broad social immorality. So they say if you have a nice, well-knit family, and the well-knit family stays together, you have good values, while they take daycare from the kids, employment from the father, and the rights from the mother. No, good values helps not only keep a family, but feed a family, employ a family, give education to a family. We can't let them interpret the debate that way. We could have won South Carolina last time if we talked more about that. We had more people that didn't vote than we lost the election by in South Carolina.
Brit Hume.
Governor Dean, I don't mean to take you back to the moment of excitement the other night in Des Moines, but I did want to ask you a question based on something
My voice is just barely recovering now. Please don't.
I can tell. But I did want to ask you a question about something you were quoted as saying about that issue today, which was that you said that you, where are your emotions on your sleeve, that you lead with your heart, not with your head. Is that a quality people want in a president?
Well, if you look at my record as governor, we balance budgets. Every child in my state has health care. We do early intervention in kids, following up 91% of all our kids and supporting the kids that are in trouble, supporting their families so they have a better chance of going to college than they do of going to prison. Now, what I can offer the American people is somebody who believes in social justice, tempered by being a fiscal conservative. tempered by wanting budgets to be manageable. The greatest injustice you can do in this country is to have an unbalanced budget for a long period of time. I think the president's unbalancing this budget is deliberate. $500 billion deficit, as far as the eye can see, means more cuts in programs for kids, more cuts in education, more cuts in college. So, yes, I lead with my heart. I say what I believe. I think it's time that somebody in this party stood up for what we believe in and wasn't so careful about what they were saying. If we're willing to say anything we have to say to get elected, then we're going to lose. We have to say what we believe, whether it's popular or not.
But what do you mean by not with your head? Not with your head. Isn't there a temperament issue that people may be alarmed about that?
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are alarmed because they've been alarmed by all kinds of folks who've criticized some of the things I've said. But I truly believe that we absolutely have to stand up for bedrock democratic principles. Al Sharpton talked about it a couple of minutes ago. We're not going to beat George Bush by trying to be like him. If we want it, what we're really trying to do here is not just change presidents. What we're really trying to do here is steer the country back to a time when we were all in it together. This president has divided us. What I say, what we say in my campaign, when we say we want our country back, we want a country back for all of us, and you have to get out there and lead with your heart and lay it all out for the American people, because that doesn't happen very often in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Senator Kerry, Governor Dean has said of you, and I believe also of Senator Edwards, that you cast votes that you knew were wrong on the war for political reasons. How do you answer that charge?
Well, I stood up to the people of Massachusetts and the country. Those are the people I answer to. And I answered by saying that there was a right way to hold Saddam Hussein accountable, and there was a wrong way. The right way was what the president promised, to go to the United Nations, to respect the building of an international coalition in truth, to exhaust the remedies of inspections, and literally to only go to war as a last resort. Now, I've fought all my life for peace. I fought against the war in Vietnam when I came home. I fought against Ronald Reagan's illegal war in Central America. I fought with John McCain to make peace in Vietnam. I fought to hold the Khmer Rouge accountable in Cambodia, and on and on. If anybody in New Hampshire believes that John Kerry would have in fact gone to war the way George Bush did, they shouldn't vote for me. But if they know that I would have stood up and exhausted the remedies and done what was necessary to hold him accountable, but lived up to the values and principles of our country, then I'm the person to be president who actually can make America more secure without breaching relationships across this planet.
Senator, you have said of that vote on the resolution that authorized the president at his discretion to use military force against Saddam Hussein, that it was a vote to threaten the use of force.
Brett,
let me just finish the question.
Sure.
And you now are saying it was a vote to hold Saddam Hussein accountable. In fact, it was it not, a vote to permit the president to use force at his discretion?
As a last resort was the promise of a president. And I wrote in the New York Times at that time, I said the United States of America should never go to war because it wants to, it should only go to war because it has to. And that means building legitimacy and consent of the American people, Brett. Look, I know there's a test as a commander-in-chief as to when you send young Americans off to war, because I know what happens when you lose that consent. And you got to be able to look in the eyes of a family and say, you exhausted every possibility and you only sent their son or daughter to die because you had no other choice. I believe George Bush failed that test in Iraq. I said so at the time, and that's what I believe happened.
Thank you very much.
There was a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. He chose the wrong way. And he's run the most arrogant, inept, reckless, and ideological foreign policy in the modern history of our country.
Senator Lieberman, Senator Lieberman, you voted the same way. You have also objected to the way the president has handled things, and yet you went ahead and voted for the $87 billion, which Senator Kerry and Senator Edwards did not. How do you answer what they have to say here?
What was the question?
The question is, you took different votes
yes,
here.
no, at the end. What was your?
Well, how do you respond to what they're saying about
that? Brit, you're absolutely right. I have criticized the president for overstating some of the arguments about why we went to war. I've said I was shocked that the administration wasn't better prepared to take advantage of the military victory. But I repeat again, this was a just war. Look, when I voted for the resolution in the fall of 2002, I had no illusions. I knew it would be an unpopular vote in parts of the Democratic Party in my race for the presidency. But I did it because I put my hand on the Bible and took an oath to protect the security of the United States. And I believed that Saddam Hussein was a clear and present danger and threat to the security of the United States, the people of Iraq, and the stability of the world. I have said before that at times in its policy, the Bush administration has given a bad name to a just war, but a just war it was. And again, we are safer as a people with Saddam Hussein in prison, not in power. Now we have an extraordinary opportunity in the war against terrorism to build in Iraq a democratizing, modernizing country in the middle of the Arab and Islamic worlds, which will send a message to the majority in the Islamic world that there is a better way than the hatred and death that Al-Qaeda presents to them. It is, if you'll forgive me, the American, the democratic way. That's what we have an opportunity to do now.
Thank you, Senators. I think you all know we have we've only about 15 minutes left, so we're going to take another break and we'll be right back.
I told you it wasn't popular in all sections of the Democratic Party, but you got to do what you think is right for your country.
You Decide 2004 is brought to you by America's local telecom companies. The future, faster.